Sorry about that. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's just kind of just an informal group of people. I think they're centered in Queens,
Uh-huh.
and something kind of fun to just do on some weeknights. It's similar to this.
Do you know some of those people?
I do, yeah.
Uh-huh.
There are several people that go to all of the meetings, kind of like this, and there are a lot of people that come in
Uh-huh.
and
And
go.
are they on Zoom, do you know? Or are they
Yeah, it's on Zoom. They don't record any of the sessions, so
only Zoom?
it's not
Yeah.
on YouTube or anything like that. But
They're not in person anywhere.
no, but we've
Uh-huh.
talked about several Jungian books on
Uh-huh.
through their meetup. We've done sessions on Answer to Job, on some of Edinger's works, and then they've
Uh-huh.
got the Dream Group. They also do like a transpersonal psychology group. So it's a nice resource.
Yeah, boy, there's a lot going on all of a sudden. I'm delighted. Okay, so we are starting to get a few people aboard now on the YouTube channel, and so that means we're live, and we're going to start with paragraph 23. And I'll step up and read the first paragraph that we're going to talk about today. If we follow the history of a neurosis with attention, we regularly find a critical moment when some problem emerged that was evaded on the YouTube channel. And I'm going to have to change something about my sound. I have a problem emerged which needs to get fixed. Okay. All right. I think that's got it, hopefully. All right. So a problem emerged that was evaded. This evasion is just as natural and just as common a reaction as the laziness, slackness, cowardice, anxiety, ignorance, and unconscious, which are at the back of it. Whenever things are unpleasant, difficult, and dangerous, we mostly hesitate and, if possible, give them a wide berth. I regard these reasons as entirely sufficient. The symptomology of incest, which is undoubtedly there, and which Freud rightly saw, is, to my mind, a secondary phenomenon already pathological. Okay. Anybody want to talk about that?
I think it might be good just for context to give some idea of what we stepped into here, because
okay, well, we're in the middle of the chapter on the Eros Theory, and so I guess we're in the middle of discussing neuroses that may exist that relate to Eros. So, for example, I can admit that, there was a moment in my life when I was attracted to my sister. those days have long since passed. And it's a long, sad story, which I won't bother you with. But in any case, it doesn't have to do with me trying to. Whoops, wait a minute. Can you hear me now?
yeah, I've been able to hear you the whole time.
You have, okay. All right, well.
Yeah, me too.
All right. Nothing that I ever did or she ever did about it, but I certainly realized that there was a moment when I was attracted to her as a woman, but that moment passed rather quickly, actually, for a variety of other reasons.
I was just hoping to also establish some context in which Jung is writing this. So in this chapter, he is talking about the Eros theory, but he's trying to highlight this situation, which was happening behind the scenes of this this other situation, which he outlined in chapter 1. And then he's talking about a dream in which a woman wants to murder her mother. And in the following paragraph, he starts talking about the Electra complex or the Oedipus complex. So like, I think that more or less brings us up to speed to where now he's talking about incest as being an extension of the Oedipus and the Electra situation.
Right. So neuroses are your psyche wanting to be in two places at the same time. Maybe one that it shouldn't be in and one that it should be in. And so you're split between the two sides, and you need to find the third thing, which is the better way to go in any neuroses, I guess. And so, Jung's position was that the Oedipus Electra business was really a secondary phenomenon. It wasn't really indicative of the way everybody behaves, I think. We see it a lot now in young men who don't leave home, for example. And so, that's an Oedipus complex, and you have to grow up and go out and into the real world and face a real woman and real life. Anybody want to comment on that? Okay, Nick, go ahead with paragraph 4. We'll just keep going. I'm just blabbering, because I'm not a psychologist, so.
So right, he's constantly referring back to the dream, and the dream that he's talking about. Let me see if I can just quickly find it. It's not an actual dream, but it's just kind of a quick hypothetical dream that he gives. Let's see. Yes. 1 second. Yes. Okay. For instance, a daughter loves her mother tenderly, but dreams to her great distress that her mother is dead. Freud argues that there exists in this daughter, unbeknownst to herself, the exceedingly painful wish to see her mother removed from this world with all speed, and so on. So that's the dream that he's going to be referring back to in this paragraph. So now paragraph 24. The dream is often occupied with apparently very silly details, thus producing an impression of absurdity, or else it is on the surface so unintelligible as to leave us thoroughly bewildered. Hence, we always have to overcome a certain resistance before we can seriously set about disentangling the intricate web through patient work. But when at last we penetrate its real meaning, we find ourselves deep in the dreamer's secrets and discover with astonishment that an apparently quite senseless dream is in the highest degree significant, and that in reality, it speaks only of important and serious matters. This discovery compels rather more respect for the so-called superstition that dreams have a meaning, to which the rationalistic temper of our age has hitherto given short shrift.
So basically, we've written off dreams, or many people have in the modern world, so-called, but actually dreams are 2-million-year-old man or woman who is sending us messages that thinks we need to know. And it does it in a bombastic way, our deep unconscious. This is the unconscious that kept us alive through all of evolution. So all of us are the progeny of millions of ancestors who did two things successfully. They survived until they reproduced. That's what they did. And so in all those millions of generations, they learned a few things instinctually, I guess is the way to say it. And so human beings have been paying attention to dreams for quite a long time. Obviously, there are many dreams in the Bible that are of great significance, like the handwriting on the wall that Nebuchadnezzar was presented with. I forget by whom, but people who could interpret dreams were in short supply and in demand, even in those days. And nowadays we call them psychoanalysts, I guess.
Yeah, it's a really curious occurrence too, to just think about how there's almost a blind spot when one is working with dreams. I mean, I know that's the case when I work with my own dreams, and then when I take them to work within various dream groups or with other people who are interested in dreams, or when someone else presents me a dream. I mean, most of the time, I and others have no clue what the core of the dream is, really. But when you hear someone else's dream, at least this has been my experience, that sometimes it's glaringly obvious what the blind spot is that the dream is presenting.
Definitely.
And it's rarely the case where it's like, I know last week, Skip, you said something to the effect of your dream was like, tell me something I don't know. Right. And it's like, okay, I think that I'm pretty certain it always is telling you something that you don't know. And if that's the response,
or it thinks you don't know. Okay.
Right. Yeah. But I'm just trying to point out that there's this blind spot that's happening where it's like, if you ask somebody, do you dream? I think more often than not, people tend to say no. And then they proceed to tell you, oh, well, I don't dream, but I had this one dream and it's kind of silly and it's this, and this. And it's like, whoa, they just told you some pretty crazy stuff that's like kind of revealing.
Right. Well, your dreams are somewhat bombastic. Mine are in any case on many occasions. And they're trying to beat you severely about the head and shoulders to pay attention to something. And so when I said, tell me something I don't know if I thought that the first time I had those dreams, but after I had the first execution dream and knew what it was about, I didn't need the next 25.
Yeah.
Right. And I think there's stages too, where sometimes the dreams are unknowingly bored and they're giving you these mundane, so last week it really resonated when you said, well, tell me something I don't know, because there's to me an anti-hysterical bias and a maintenance of your own authority, that if the dream comes through, I'm going, wait, you're behind by about 6 months, catch up. So maybe I didn't listen to that dream before, but I already had done. And I have a component of my architectural well-being called imagination. And it's like, that's a great idea, but what are you going to do with it? Which is the opposite of middle management, where, oh yeah, it's a great idea. I'm glad you're creative. Now get back to work. Well, what that is doing is that's squashing creativity by hooking them to say they acknowledged it. But there's what are you going to do with it? And when you said, well, tell me something I don't know, there are times when I wake up and go, all right, well, at least I got some rest, because the dreams, they're not in sync, SYNC. And that, I think that goes to speak to both your point, Skip, and also Nick, that there is something we don't know. But a concept I like to use with dreams is reasons are always unreasonable. And
I want to add one layer to what you and I think are saying, and it's that not only do they present us something that we don't know, but we don't know what we don't know.
Right. And I always say,
fair enough.
Yeah, don't go with the logic, go with the unconscious and the creativity.
I'd like to add to that, please. In my experience with dreams, sometimes we have a dream that's we don't understand, and it's not what I would call speech ready. So we'll have the dream, then we have another version of the dream. It will be slightly different. It's not speech ready. And then eventually in your subconscious, I believe, it kind of twists and turns, and then it becomes speech ready, and it's really obvious. And it's usually answering a question that you have.
I couldn't agree more. I couldn't agree more.
Right. And
Well said.
And a good thing to do with your unconscious is right before you go to sleep, ask a question about something you want to know about and see what your dream says. But at the same time, we have to remember that the dream, the 2 million year old man, doesn't have to live in the 21st century. You do. And so, right. And so sometimes the dream has solutions which were maybe appropriate 10,000 years ago or 1 million years ago, but they aren't today's solution necessarily. And that's where the ego comes in to differentiate. And
I think it's also the case that dreams are pretty rarely oracular. I mean, it's not like they're providing answers or anything.
Yeah.
Well, it's like the people who interpreted the oracles at Delphi. I mean, if you watch the movie The 300, and when they have the woman who's inhaling the vapors and she's swimming and floating and she's having her numinous experience, and then the E4 leans down as she kind of croaks, whispers some words, and then he says them. But you're right, Nick, that the non-oracular, it's not telling the story. It's just telling. And if it's not telling, so to speak, like, oh, that's very telling, you really get it. But it's not, as Marilyn said, I love that they're not speech ready, because there are feelings and experiences and dreams where they don't need words. They don't need you to write them down and basically explain them to death. There's the visceral sense of them with you. And I laugh that, the modern man doesn't have to live in the 20th century, except I look at me in the cabin at 9,300 feet. And once the sun has gone completely down, I'm not in the 21st century anymore. I don't leave the deck. I will not walk down and then hear a crack or a pop or a squish, and then there's a 450-pound bear or a mountain lion. I mean, I am always military defensible space in a place where I could jet back right through the door. And so in that sense, I walk out into that liminal land of, my ancestors 10,000 years ago, where there are no lights. And it's actually better if I'm out there if I don't turn the lights on, because then you hear more clearly. And obviously I'm still alive, so far it's still working. But there have been times when I turn around and I hear a squish, and I look up and the bear has his paws up on the deck. Now the deck is 3 feet up plus the rail, but when a bear is like that, I'm going, wow, I'm still in swiping range.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
So I at night, if I'm on the deck, I sit in the other chair that's away from the other edge of the deck, because I realize that in that chair, they could just reach over. I wouldn't know it. So I'm, look at me squirting blood everywhere. But so then I like that not living in the 21st century, that 2 million year old man, woman.
Yeah. One thing that Huckleberry, Michigan says is that according to Jung, they are compensatory. Well, I don't think dreams are only compensatory. They can be compensatory, but but you have to decide. And so they're compensatory. Certainly my execution dreams were compensatory in the sense that I was in psychic trouble because I was unemployed for 2 years. And so my dreams kept telling me, you got to get a job. modern world men are executed for not having dreams. You in effect get thrown off your horse, and you have to get back on.
The compensatory comment is actually, I think, really apt. They're not all compensatory, but I think there's a level of dreams that are reactionary to your daily life, and those are compensatory. So there's a literal mirrored dance from a dream form that's speaking the same language in a different, basically saying the same thing in a different language. That's compensatory. Then there's the archetypal big dream, like theosophic vision, awake dream, or a dream where you wake up and you are changed. That the lightning strike archetypal big dreams, which are then more shamanic in a way. So that I think there's stages of, or levels of dreams, levels of
Right.
intensity.
I want to throw one thing out there in response to that and just say that I think the best way to describe Jung and the Jungians' approach to dreams is that they're non-dogmatic, and there's never like a set list of rules when thinking about a dreams where they would say they're always compensatory or always have an archetypal image or something like that. I think that, and the reason I say that is because it's kind of frustrating to try to get a grip on how Jungians approach dreams, because there is no set list of rules.
Right.
That's a good point. That's a really good point, Nick, because, for example, Freud was going towards the girl wishing her mom was dead so she can marry daddy, and that whole Oedipal prison, when in reality, it was the child becoming the parent of the woman. And she was not killing her woman, she was killing her girl. She was becoming a woman. But it presents as to kill her mom, but the reality is it's for her to grow up.
Yeah, there's a section of an essay that Jung wrote, and I can't remember what it's called, but it's in the collection of essays just titled Dreams. I think it's like a later addition to the Collected Works. But anyways, in one of those essays, Jung just reiterates a point that he made at several points in his career, which is that every dream that a patient tells me, I approach it like I have no clue what the dream is about, and I know nothing about dreams. And that's my starting point for working with all dreams, which I think is really invaluable to working with dreams and also understanding how Jungians approach dreams, because Freudians were very much on the side of setting up a set of rules and also having prescribed interpretations for certain symbols that appear in dreams. They were very much on the side of like, we could write a dream dictionary and dispense with that and be done with it. Whereas Jungians are the complete opposite.
So Neil says, so the unconscious holds two sides of an argument. You take one of them, it will give you the opposite. Yeah, maybe. As you mature, you have to be able to distinguish. And remember, Dr. Jung kept repeating 1 John 4:1, which is, examine the spirits, whether they be of God or not. And the point is that, things will come up for you in your psyche, and you have to decide whether they fit in your life or not.
Right.
And they might not.
Well, and Nick's point too is excellent, because then Jung's view on dreams is more mature. Freud's is still trying to ask for acknowledgement from his parents or mentor. And by making all these reasons, let me show you my work. Let me show you how much I've done. Who are you trying to prove something to, Dr. Freud? Whereas with Jung came with the beginner's mind, and every single dream started tabula rasa, clean slate, and he checked his expectations at the door. So he would notice nuance that would drive a core meaning of some direction of a dream to then navigate that with a client, but not because of page 6, appendix 7, part F, exception C. None of that geometry proof stuff. which to me I find to be mundane and overly explanatory and actually petitioning like a child for attention from a parent.
Yeah.
So that's to me where Freud and Jung differ, is that Jung matured and Freud.
Okay, well, let's see if we can get through a bit more of this essay. So, Annabelle, could you read the next 2 paragraphs?
Can I pass right now?
Sure.
And I will read a little bit later. But it looks like Jordan got his copy of the book.
Yeah, part of it.
Jordan, will you take mine and I'll be after you?
I would say. So are we,
Thank you.
paragraph 23, is that?
No, 25 and 26.
25, 26. So, as Freud says, dream analysis is the via regia to the unconscious. It leads straight to the deepest personal secrets and is, therefore, an invaluable instrument in the hand of the physician and educator of the soul. The analytical method in general, and not only the specifically Freudian psychoanalysis, consists in the main of numerous dream analyses. In the course of treatment, the dreams successfully throw up the contents of the unconscious in order to expose them to the disinfecting power of daylight. And in this way, much that is valuable and believed lost is found again. It is only to be expected that for many people who have false ideas about themselves, the treatment is a veritable torture. For, in accordance with the old mystical saying, give up that thou hast, then shalt thou receive. They are called upon to abandon all their cherished illusions in order that something deeper, fairer, and more embracing may arise within them. It is a genuine old wisdom that comes to light again in the treatment. And it is especially curious that this kind of psychic education should prove necessary in the heyday of our culture. In more than one respect, it may be compared to the Socratic method, though it must be said that analysis penetrates to far greater depths.
I just want to add one thing to that, because the Socratic method has entered the room. It's really great that they're bringing that up, because the dialectic, which was something that was happening well before Socrates and well after Socrates up to the present day in philosophy, is probably the closest approximation to, I imagine, what happens in analysis as well. But particularly in the Socratic and Platonic framework, Socrates is always dialoguing with people and attempting to show them their shortcomings. But it's not just, I've had this conversation with a lot of people when we're talking about just this thing. And it's like, I think people commonly think Socrates was just trying to make other people feel like an idiot, make them realize how wrong they were. But no, in fact, I think that it was really that he was allied with the good and the true, and was basing all of his, dialectical examination with people on this Platonic, more or less, theology. So where he says, though it must be said that analysis penetrates to far greater depths, I would also add, and much higher heights, because it's almost like in the Socratic method, it's like Socrates was trying to prove people wrong so this greater truth could enter.
Oh yeah, I really loved that Socratic method back in law school. It was peachy.
Right. Well, I think the Socratic method that people know in law school, or just more commonly, is more like sophistry.
Yes,
right.
Definitely.
It is, and the quote. What strikes me here is they are called upon to abandon all their cherished illusions. And that's speaking to what I was talking about earlier with leaving your expectations at the door. So that in that way, in order that something deeper, fairer, and more embracing may arise within them.
Yeah. Jordan, let me interrupt just for a minute, because Samantha has joined us, and she says no tarot. And so I wonder, do you have access to the YouTube chat?
I don't. I'm on my iPad.
So hi, Samantha.
I have the chat.
Okay, so
And so, Samantha, we're going to migrate the tarot to my YouTube site through a Zoom live stream, and we will start. It's going to be called Interstate Highways, Tarot as a Roadmap for Life. And we're going to take that. We'll most likely have guests as well to interview and add to the panel. And that will most likely start here in a couple of weeks-ish, once Mercury is not retrograde. As I was looking at all that, I was like, why would I want to hassle myself to just trouble myself all month long?
Yeah, I'm going to give Jordan's contact points here on the chat.
Yeah, and definitely you'll be
YouTube
welcome.
Chat.
Love to see you again.
Okay, so nice to see you again, and nice to see you're doing well.
Oh, Nick turned into a dog. I guess Halloween's coming, you know. It's like
It's a real dog.
poof.
I was wondering who was making all that noise.
Yeah.
Much
Yeah.
smaller than my imagination.
Let's see.
So thoughts on these two paragraphs, everybody?
Well, I want to move on.
Okay.
Paragraph 27.
Paragraph 27. Are you up to a full
Yes.
page there?
I'm ready.
All right, go for it, Annabelle.
Okay. The Freudian mode of investigation sought to prove that an overwhelming importance attaches to the erotic or sexual factor as regards the origin of the pathogenic conflict. According to this theory, there is a collision between the trend of the conscious mind and the unmoral, incompatible, unconscious wish. The unconscious wish is infantile. That is, it is a wish from the childish past that will no longer fit the present and is therefore repressed on moral grounds. The neurotic has the soul of a child who bears ill with arbitrary restrictions whose meaning he does not see. He tries to make this morality his own, but falls into disunity with himself. One side of him wants to suppress, the other longs to be free, and this struggle goes by the name of neurosis. Were the conflict clearly conscious in all its parts, presumably it would never give rise to neurotic symptoms. These occur only when we cannot see the other side of our nature and the urgency of its problems. Only under these conditions does the symptom appear, and it helps to give expression to the unrecognized side of the psyche. The symptom is therefore, in Freud's view, the fulfillment of unrecognized desires which, when conscious, come into violent conflict with our moral convictions. As already observed, this shadow side of the psyche, being withdrawn from conscious scrutiny, cannot be dealt with by the patient. He cannot correct it, cannot come to terms with it, nor yet disregard it. For in reality, he does not possess the unconscious impulses at all. Thrust out from the hierarchy of the conscious psyche, they have become autonomous complexes, which it is the task of analysis, not without great resistances, to bring under control again. There are patients who boast that for them the shadow side does not exist. They assure us that they have no conflict, but they do not see that other things of unknown origin cumber their path. Hysterical moods, underhand tricks which they play on themselves and their neighbors, a nervous catarrh of the stomach, pains in various places, irritability for no reason, and a whole host of nervous symptoms.
I'd
Love
like
that
to
paragraph.
comment before Marilyn leaves us, because it's my sense that the unconscious does not have morality in the sense that we think of morality as codified. And so, Marilyn, what do you think about that?
Well, I'm back. I just had to leave for 5 minutes, but
Okay,
I'm back already.
okay.
I don't really know.
Okay, well, for example, the first sort of psychological direction was given by the Ten Commandments, which was the law. And, all of those commandments are
Do you
nice.
mean moral or ethical direction, or did you mean to say psychological direction?
Well, yeah, I mean, early humans, we're talking about humans 3,500 years ago now, who were the followers of Moses, right? And who Moses was trying to control. He pulled out all these nice rules to follow. And the problem is that we follow those rules in the breach. And there's nothing per se from the unconscious that says, you can, you have to honor your father and your mother. Okay, lots of people don't honor their fathers and mothers, and with good reason. So,
Well, I'd add that if, when something is not moral or amoral, then we need to speak a language that's not about morality in any shape or form. And that takes me to capital N, nature. Nature knows no emotions. It only knows weather. And nature will kill you. Nature will also nourish you. And so what's interesting to me is if you approach the unconscious like capital N, nature, it's not punitive. It's not discerning. It's not judgmental. It's not even decisive. It simply is present. And so there's a purity of an intensity of archetypal voice that I think can be heard, but heard without the trappings of the expectations of what's good or bad. It's more what is. And the quote to me that comes to mind is from Morihei Ueshiba, which if I don't butcher it in the remembrance, he's the founder of Aikido. But he said, when you focus on the good or the bad, good and bad in quotes, of your fellows, you make an opening in your heart for maliciousness to enter. Testing, competing with, and criticizing others weakens and defeats you. So I think that notion goes to capital N, nature. And that way we can view the unconscious contents and their voice and our experience of them without judgment, discernment, and maybe always with discernment, because we're going to take a position, but not with positive, negative, good or evil, not good or bad, where it is what it is. And it's like drinking water. I mean, some people don't like cold water. Some people only like cold water, but it's still water. So if we look at it that way, without the adjectives and without the trappings of morality, I think then we can discuss, as Jung is here, of, lose those cherished illusions, he said.
That quote was from the founder of IKEA.
Nice. Aikido. Nice.
Aikido.
IKEA. It might as well be the story you could never get out of. I mean, it's the Bermuda Triangle of retail. So many have entered, few have left.
There's a different way to look at it. And when I'm looking at it from the Jungian perspective, I'm seeing I'm in a room with a patient, and the patient has no sense of morality. Do I go with, well, there's nature and you just, you can die, or do I help that person understand there's a way of living in society? Mm-hmm. So I'm looking at it when we're studying this book. I'm looking at, how do I help the person to understand who they are and what is happening in their life. And then if they can be neurotic and psychotic both, they can have both tendencies. So a very big part of it for me when I'm treating someone is to make sure that they're not in danger. and they don't endanger anyone else. So I look at it not in the way of, oh, I'm living in nature and I could be killed any second, because they're so nervous to begin with when they come to see you. It brings someone agony for them to go and see a therapist. They don't casually go. So someone has to be really uncomfortable. So for me, the goal is to help them reduce their anxiety level. And so I'm looking at this book in the terms of treatment of patients. And I don't know if that's the way to look at it or not, but I'm always looking at it. How do I help that person find a way to live in comfort within their own skin? So I would tell them, well, don't go on the back porch where there's a bear. You might get very nervous, and it might, if it's not, the bear is not smiling at you. The bear doesn't see you as a friend, because a lot of people their anxiety is so enormous, they cannot find a way to live comfortably within themselves.
I appreciate that, Marilyn. And I think, to use the example first, personally, anecdotally, every mountain lion I've encountered has actually touched me. I mean, I didn't move, I didn't run. There were cubs involved. I'm going to die, except I'm nature too. So in that sense, I was already dead. So why worry? And I think that calmness then engaged the animal in such a way that I'm still here. Now, I won't say I made a friend. If I see him again, it might go all down different. But I'm curious, in your practice, do you then, to apply the nature, nature kill, nature nurture piece, do you look for how their inner nature synchronizes with themselves to kind of balance out that anxiety, so that instead of them judging themselves anxiously, always in the wrong, always in shame, do you kind of find that place where they haven't found yet, that their inner nature that resonates with them? Does that
That's
land?
a wonderful question. It's to help them find that they're not different from other people. So I would work with, well, this is you, this is somebody else. They're not better, they're not worse. I would not go in the realm of animals with people that I see, because it's not, to me, it's not useful. It's more their concerns are, can they live in this world?
Oh,
So,
yes, I understood.
Right.
So to me, it's very important for them to see themselves as not a member of nature, but a member of humanity.
Right.
And it's
Okay.
quite different.
It is quite different. And I have to say that's just anecdotally, personally, where I live in capital in nature. I mean, and so I'm in make anxiety walk the plank, and you make shame walk the plank, and you typically find that despair and anxiety were always tied to its heels. And my joke is, well, the sharks have to be fed off. And so, but I'm not an anxious person. So there's a difference, and that's relative, and that's important that you're saying, get them into society so they have group gathering, social, that is
let's
nourishing.
Consider what Moses was facing. Okay, when he laid down the 10 Commandments, he was facing lots of situations within his group, whoever that was, that were causing difficulties. And so, one of those was, coveting your neighbor's wife type thing, right? And one of those was murdering, and so on. And so he was trying to lay down big, broad brush rules, as Marilyn says, so that people could live in society, right?
That's a great point, Skip. September here up at 9,300 feet, September was the elk rut. And a couple of times stampeding behind the cabin, enough to shake it and wake me up. But there's no marriage, there's no fidelity with the elk. And so So that goes to show Marilyn's point of not introducing them to nature, get their inner nature to swim in society, and instead of the rut, because the rut, it would be confusing to a moralistic society, and it's an animal piece that's not so much taboo or not generally accepted. It's animal. It's not human.
Well, I mean, let's talk about taboos, for example. I would suppose that the taboo against incest came up probably long before there were human beings. In other words, it was maybe codified when human beings came along, but animals experienced that if they mated with their mother or something like that, their children would be in somehow not all there.
Weaker, right.
Weaker. And therefore, while Freud is talking about this incest wish, but that incest wish was probably there for a long time, but it finally got codified.
Huh? You can just sit it down.
The stricture against against incest was only codified in the human species.
Well, and interesting. That's a great point, Skip, because that's actually with Freud. Every time I read one of those interpretations, I feel like, Dr. Freud, will you please stop projecting your own stuff on these people and evolve through the rite of passage and grow the heck up? Whereas with Jung, he would go straight to tabula rasa, and how does this particular experience of a dream flow into life?
Okay, so
can I throw one thing in here really quickly?
Okay, yes, Nick, go ahead.
And I also just want to say, I mean, I think this is a huge conversation, and I kind of hope that we can bench this, because in the next chapter, this question is taken up with a great deal of precision, I think, because he starts talking about Nietzsche. But, there's a line that comes to mind, and from a poet, I've referenced it before. I think his name is D.H. Lawrence, but it's something to the effect of, I never saw a wild thing sorry for itself, which is just, a really wonderful thing to contemplate. But at the same time, think about the inverse of that. And, it's easy to see how either of these things could be taken to an extreme. I think morality is certainly a construct of the conscious mind. And then you fast forward the kind of mosaic law or morality that you're discussing now forward to the present day, or in the context of Jung or Kant or Nietzsche or any of those guys who were famously scathing critics of the kind of morality of their day. They almost see morality as being deleterious and really perpetuating in this deterioration of true morality in place of this kind of catch-all morality.
Yeah.
So these
Nick,
really two
Nick, the
opposites
poem
playing.
too. That's a perfect poem for this discussion, because I think it continues. I mean, I've never seen a wild thing sorry for itself. I think it goes, a bird will fall without a sound, frozen, dead from a bough.
Right.
And I remember last year you kind of got on me about, you really like that movie G.I. Jane. The funny thing is, the Master Chief quotes that poem in G.I. Jane.
Oh, nice.
But that I've never seen a wild thing sorry for itself. And then that lends itself back to the anxiety that Marilyn was talking about, that most people feel. They feel sorry for themselves. And so they are weakened in boundary, whereas a wild thing is not.
Yes, but I think we also just need to compare that notion with the fact that Jung is continually talking about the synthesis of culture and nature in these chapters and in the coming chapters. So,
right.
Yeah. So because a lot of this is about Freud, let's try to tiptoe through the next 3 pages of this chapter, and maybe make with one break. So
shall I take 28, 29?
And 30.
And 30? Okay.
Yeah.
So paragraph 28. Freudian psychoanalysis has been accused of liberating man's, in parentheses, fortunately, repressed animal instincts and thus causing incalculable harm. This apprehension shows how little trust we place in the efficacy of our moral principles. People pretend that only the morality preached from the pulpit holds men back from unbridled license, like licentious. But a much more effective regulator is necessity, which sets bounds far more real and persuasive than any moral precepts. It is true that psychoanalysis makes the animal instincts conscious, though not, as many would have it, with a view to giving them boundless freedom, but rather to incorporating them in a purposeful whole. It is under all circumstances an advantage to be in full possession of one's personality. Otherwise, the repressed elements will only crop up as a hindrance elsewhere, not just at some unimportant point, but at the very spot where we are most sensitive. If people can be educated to see the shadow side of their nature clearly, it may be hoped that they will also learn to understand and love their fellow men better. A little less hypocrisy and a little more self-knowledge, sounds like Elvis, can only have good results and respect for our neighbor. For we are all too prone to transfer to our fellows the injustice and violence we inflict upon our own natures. Paragraph 29. The Freudian theory of repression certainly does seem to say that there are, as it were, only hypermoral people who repress their unmoral, instinctive natures. Accordingly, the unmoral man who lives a life of unrestrained instinct should be immune to neurosis. This is obviously not the case, as experience shows. Such a man can be just as neurotic as any other. If we analyze him, we simply find that his morality is repressed. The neurotic immoralist presents, in Nietzsche's striking phrase, the picture of the pale felon who does not live up to his acts. Paragraph 30. We can, of course, take the view that the repressed remnants of decency are in this case only a traditional hangover from fancy, which imposes an unnecessary check on instinctual nature and should therefore be eradicated. The principle of écraser l'infamie would end in a theory of absolute libertinism. Naturally, that would be quite fantastic and nonsensical. It should never be forgotten, and of this the Freudian school must be reminded, that morality was not brought down on tables of stone from Sinai and imposed on the people, but is a function of the human soul, as old as humanity itself. Morality is not imposed from outside. We have it in ourselves from the start. Not the law, but our moral nature, without which the collective life of human society would be impossible. That is why morality is found at all levels of society. It is the instinctive regulator of action, which also governs the collective life of the herd. But moral laws are valid only within a compact human group. Beyond that, they cease. There, the old truth runs, homo homini lupus. With the growth of civilization, we have succeeded in subjecting ever larger human groups to the rule of the same morality, without, however, having yet brought the moral code to prevail beyond the social frontiers, that is, in the free space between mutually independent societies. There, as of old, reign lawlessness and license and mad immorality, though, of course, it is only the enemy who dares to say it out loud. I love that's beautiful.
Right. And so the point is, it seems to me, that by bringing the unconscious into the conscious, then we can look at it in the context of the society in which we live.
Right.
Now, many people don't want to live in the society in which we live, or they don't know about it yet, as children don't understand these things until we teach them. I mean, they are basically wild animals when they are born. And so we have to show them, what are the consequences, that there are consequences to certain behaviors. Other comments?
I think these paragraphs actually give me a better sense of how to express what I was asking the question to Marilyn about, of, do you find the inner nature important? And I had the sense at that point, 3 paragraphs ago, that, well, finding my pure, capital N, nature is most important. Here, though, I realize that's not what I'm doing. I'm trying to find how the inner nature functions interdependently in society, rather than trying to become imbalanced the other way. So I appreciate these 3 paragraphs, because I think it gave me a better sense of what I was trying to express. And
yeah, it's interesting. I had a conversation with Tim. I guess it was a one-sided conversation this morning with Tim, but it seems to me that what the artist does, and this is a simplistic way of talking about it, what a true artist, and I don't mean somebody who wants to be a substitute for a camera. I mean a true artist. What a true artist is doing is seeing a duality, and they're finding the reconciling third that they can express in their art, whatever that may be, whatever the art may be. And and that's what is needed for neuroses. Now, of course, one of the big reasons that we have to have psychotherapists is that there's no neurosis that lives by itself in the human psyche. Okay, it's not as easy as this or this. And if we find the third thing, then we're there. It doesn't work that way. I mean, you may have quite a few complexes, and they're all interlocked. And I'm sure the therapist has to find out, has to gradually open them up and find out which one is at bottom. But I mean, what he's saying here is that, at bottom, we are instinctual beings, and what we need to be able to do is to understand what those instincts are telling us, and then we have to compare that against the way we have to live in society.
mm-hmm.
Right.
Well, and Marilyn was saying earlier, she's working to bring people to be able to be more able to navigate and live in society.
Sure.
And then now I'm really hearing that inner nature piece. You're empathically listening, it sounds like, because you're not just, scripting from a book. You're literally listening to how is their anxiety calculus affecting them, so that you're tailoring and tempering, if I could kind of get your bent right, so that they can be more healthy in society with themselves and interact rather than avoid. Is that?
Were you asking me?
Yeah, I'm curious. I kind of heard more, because when you're getting them to be able to live in society more easily, or to actually do it, it feels like you're enlivening their health so that they can navigate comfortably rather than anxiously, if I'm hearing you correctly.
Yeah, to me, and I never realized it until I started working with people in depth, anxiety is such a mover, and it's so controlling. So if they can reduce their anxiety, or if they can see their anxiety and then be with it, That's very important. And in my belief, if they can take a pill and it makes them less anxious, that's not so terrible, because it can make people really not able to function. And from my perspective, my job is to help people function in the world, how to function, how to be, how to vote, how to have a difference of opinion with family members. So, and when I think about animals, we're talking about animals before, I don't think they have so much anxiety as they have fear. So like, say my dog, he's not going to be a little bit nervous. He's going to be fine, or else he's terrified. There's not much of an in-between. But with people, it's like a full spectrum of where we are along a scale. So I think what I try to do with people is, well, this is where, and I'll ask them to place themselves, where are you? Put yourself on a scale from 0 to 100. Where would you like to be? And what does it take to get you there? So it's very, very practical, and help them see themselves rather than be told what to do. What is their goal, and how can we help them get to that goal? I don't know if that's useful. I don't know if that answers your question.
I think it does, because I one thing I always say, dogs and cats are honest. You do something wrong, you're already bitten. I mean, they do not pull the punch. And so to me, it's a numinous experience in a way, because it's all of a sudden, but they don't stuff the emotion. They don't stuff the feeling. And I think that they have fear as awareness, but they're not afraid. And if they're afraid, well, they're not afraid for long, because they run. So there's always an action rather than an avoidance. And so it sounds like you're getting to that scale of, well, where in your human animal spectrum are you comfortable navigating to drive your life? And that's important, because then it sounds like you're taking into account the levels of scale of intensity of different other environmental factors that they're dealing with personally, to get them onto that kind of that synchronous space. Almost like you're working on their transmission, so they're not skipping gears in a way. Yeah.
Okay. Beth, do you have the book? You don't have the book? Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
All right. Annabelle, do you have the book?
I can continue. Yep. I'd be
Okay.
happy to.
Paragraph 31.
Yes. The Freudian school is so convinced of the fundamental, indeed exclusive importance of sexuality in neurosis that it has drawn the logical conclusion and valiantly attacked the sexual morality of our day. This was beyond a doubt useful and necessary, for in this field there prevailed and still prevail ideas which, in view of the extremely complicated state of affairs, are too undifferentiated. Just as in the early Middle Ages, finance was held in contempt because there was as yet no differentiated financial morality to still each case, but only a mass morality, so today there is only a mass sexual morality. A girl who has an illegitimate baby is condemned, and nobody asks whether she is a decent human being or not. Any form of love not sanctified and sanctioned, I started to say both, by law is considered immoral, whether between worthwhile people or bounders. We are still so hypnotized by what happens that we forget how and for whom it happens, just as for the Middle Ages, finance was nothing but glittering gold, fiercely coveted, and therefore the devil. And this brings so to mind these testimonies by those 3 women in Congress about their abortions. This is exactly what he's talking about, because they now in 2021 have to say, look at me, I'm in Congress here, and you're gonna say that what I did is morally wrong when I was 16 years old, or there are various one of them went to Mexico and said, I'm lucky that I came back alive, because so many people who went and did what I did came back or didn't come back. I mean, they came back a corpse. So it's, it's life and death, And as we're talking about animals, I think it's also that question of, are we doing what we're doing for survival? Which I think in a dog's case, that area of conflict where are they safe or are they in mortal danger, right? Is really what they're dealing with. And we somehow as humans have maybe gotten around that, although I think that there are people who are responding that way, as if they're in mortal danger when they start screaming or running or taking our jobs away because of their own ego.
That survival tenet you brought up that really says a lot in the context of these paragraphs.
Yes.
Because then as we integrate our inner animal, our nature, we get more towards a thrival than just a simple survival.
Right. Which is a privilege.
Right.
It's a privilege for us to choose to thrive and drink some ashwagandha tea instead of just taking the Lipton that's, the only thing that's available.
Right.
Yeah. Well, Jung makes an important point that's relevant to the three women, I think, which we need to cover in the next paragraph, which is, yet things are not quite so simple as that. Eros is a questionable fellow and will always remain so, whatever the legislation of the future may have to say about it. He belongs on one side of man's primordial animal nature, which will endure as long as man has an animal body. On the other side, he is related to the highest forms of the spirit, but he thrives only when spirit and instinct are in the right harmony. If one or the other aspect is lacking to him, the result is injury, or at least a lopsidedness that may easily veer toward the pathological. Too much of the animal distorts the civilized man. Too much civilization makes sick animals. This dilemma reveals the vast uncertainty that Eros holds for man. For at bottom, Eros is a superhuman power, which, like nature herself, allows itself to be conquered and exploited as though it were impotent. But triumph over nature is dearly paid for. Nature requires no explanations of principle, but asks only for tolerance and wise measure. And so this is perhaps one of my most favorite Jungian quotes, which is what now? It's too much of the animal distorts civilized man. Where is that?
Just below halfway.
Too much of the animal distorts the civilized man. Too much civilization makes sick animals.
Yeah.
And I love this paragraph. I think last week it was in another group that I had mentioned that civilization disconnected from nature creates a constant irritation because we intuitively, instinctively know we're not in nature. We don't know why we're irritated, but then that disconnection from nature, in that context, civilization then causes uncivilized behavior.
Yeah. Makes sick animals.
Yeah, it makes sick animals. This is a great paragraph to that.
Right. And, that's...
If I could quote, if I could relate a bit of a dream I had recently,
Sure.
It was just maybe 3 nights ago, standing on this is in the dream, standing on 2nd Avenue, between 2nd and 3rd Avenues in Manhattan, which is generally speaking the East Village for those who can't picture that particular block. And in front of me is a construction site and everything has been raised. And I'm talking to the person who was engineer or architect or something like that, which, having been brought up by two architects and my mother was principally an engineer, you know, it was not an unfamiliar kind of person to be talking to. And the discussion was about how that entire area from 2nd Street to 8th Street and from 3rd to 2nd Avenue were becoming a gated community. And then the very next day, so now I'm out of the dream. The very next day, coincidentally, in our Jungian numinous way, I was having a gathering with some people I work with whom I had never met in person before. And a man in that gathering who doesn't live in Manhattan, but used to, said, "What's going to happen to Manhattan?" And I said, "This was my dream. A gated community." And what we're talking about right now, this idea of too much civilization, what my dream was, had to do with that confinement, right? Everyone, instead of living in this Manhattan, which has been, you know, whatever it's been, you know, sort of
Full of life.
freedom. Yes, full of life, vitality, but also a kind of freedom that you could reinvent yourself. You could move from this neighborhood to that neighborhood, move from the Lower East Side to the Upper West Side, and live a completely different lifestyle and have a different identity. Be out going to a club at 3 o'clock in the morning, and then go to a diner that's all night, and then at 6 o'clock in the morning, then you go do whatever you do. Anyway, that this was over, and everything had walls, and you had to show your identity card, right? All that.
Wow.
I think it relates to what we're talking about
I
here.
think so.
Surely, yeah.
Well, you created a Central Park that was privatized in a way. I mean, so there's the nature in these
Well,
homes, except it's not public. It's hidden,
not
like you said, the
public.
contain.
It's not Central Park because it's not Olmsted thinking about people interacting with each other and walking from the city streets into the area among the trees and then out freely. This was, and actually this was based on something that I'm very familiar with, St. Vincent's Hospital. St. Vincent's Hospital on the corner of 6th Avenue and, you know, 13th Street, whatever it is, was a hospital. I was in and out of that hospital. I lived a couple of blocks away from it. Now it is a gated community.
Mm.
Well, and
It
your use
has
of the word,
an inner garden, and there is no access to it unless you live in the building, you show your identity, you pass through security.
well, and your word containment, it was an anti-Olmsted
Yes.
Central Park. It's like it completely privatized and not public, and in that sense exclusive and inaccessible.
Right.
Which becomes too much civilization.
Right.
Right.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it
just
goes
wanna
back
throw it
to
out
the
there.
enclosure laws, right? So then we look at the history of, you know, capitalism and how, right, class systems and all that. I mean, I think it very much relates to that, where you can be here, but you can't be there.
Right.
Yeah.
Exclusionary rules.
So it is
Mm,
so
all
much
right, I'm sorry, Nick.
definition of civilization as we know it.
Nick, did you have something to say?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that, you know, I think that it changes the meaning and frankly, the imperative of the dream to consider that situation as being an intrapsychic image and having nothing to do with Manhattan at all.
So right. Yes, Nick. But here we are. I mean, that's why, as I introduced it, I said, may I introduce a dream? Because
Yeah,
that's,
and it can
that's
be-
what we've been
Well,
doing here for
yeah,
how long? A
and it
year
can-
and a half.
Well, and because
We're
of,
layers.
It can
We're-
certainly relate to both at
Yeah.
the same time.
Right.
yeah, there's actually been a movie about this called Escape from New York, I think,
Yeah.
or right, where,
Yeah, I
where
remember that.
people become prisoners in Manhattan. And I think by bringing up the issue, then you air the issue and people start to understand that, oh, well, that wouldn't be so good after all, would it?
Yeah.
You know,
Too much chain link and boundaries and that are Well, actually, the freedom is raised, R-A-Z-E-D. I like when you said that whole thing was raised. That's a
Exactly.
good point.
R-A-Z-E-D.
Yeah,
Yes.
that the
Mhm.
freedom
Very
has been
important
raised.
word. Yes.
Right. Rather
Right.
than R-A-I-S-E-D, let's raise the nature into the civilization. They're raising that.
Okay, so anyway, the Eros theory, as Jung is describing it here, and we have to apologize to Jungian fans because this chapter really is a
Hijacked
very
by Freud.
early one in Jung's work. And
Can I read this last paragraph, or are you about to?
yeah, please. Well, actually, we need 33 and 34.
Yeah, I'd like to read 33, certainly, and I can just do 34 as well if that.
Yeah, just to finish it off.
Yeah, sure. Okay, so Eros is a mighty daimon, as the wise Diotima said to Socrates. We shall never get the better of him, or only to our own hurt. He is not the whole of our inward nature, though he is at least one of its essential aspects. Thus, Freud's sexual theory of neurosis is grounded on a true and factual principle, but it makes the mistake of being one-sided and exclusive. Also, it commits the imprudence of trying to lay hold of unconfinable eros with the crude terminology of sex. In this respect, Freud is a typical representative of the materialistic epic whose hope it was to solve the world riddle in a test tube. Freud himself, with advancing years, admitted this lack of balance in his theory, and he opposed to Eros, whom he called libido, destructive, or death instinct. In his posthumous writings, he says, quote, "After long hesitancies and vacillations, we have decided to assume the existence of only two basic instincts, Eros and the destructive instinct." And other Freudians have come to call that thanatos. The aim of the first of these basic instincts is to establish ever greater unities and to preserve them thus. In short, to bind together. The aim of the second is, on the contrary, to undo connections and so to destroy things. For this reason, we also call it the death instinct, end quote. I must content myself with this passing reference, without entering more closely into the questionable nature of the conception. It is sufficiently obvious that life, like any other process, has a beginning and an end, and that every beginning is also the beginning of the end. What Freud probably means is the essential fact that every process is a phenomenon of energy, and that all energy can proceed only from the tension of opposites. It's so, of course, being a great, admirer, reader of Plato, the fact that he brings in this line from the Symposium here, Eros is a mighty daimon, it's just, really strikes a chord with me, because what happens, I could be wrong, but I think it's the only Platonic dialogue where there's a female in the dialogue, and it's the wise teacher Diotima, who's considered the kind of seeress, the teacher of Socrates, who taught Socrates about love and Eros. But throughout that entire dialogue, there are several speakers, and each speaker builds on the presentation of the last, starting one with very materialistic accounts of what they think Eros might be. One being like, Eros has to be love, it has to be erotic love, and it has to be sex and all of that stuff. And then each account builds until finally Socrates goes at the very end and, disarms every argument made before him with his classic Socratic method, but then says, no, lads, this is actually the true Eros. And it's really, really profound, but it's quite interesting, the parallel that he's drawing here with the early accounts of the kind of materialistic accounts in that dialogue of Eros, and what Freud is trying to do with Eros as well, where he says, he's trying to solve the world's problems in a test tube.
Mm-hmm.
So, I just wanted to throw that out there.
Right. Well, and I want to bring people's attention to a tremendous book that was published in 1949, I believe. It's called Psychic Energy, and it was written by Esther Harding, M. Esther Harding. Esther Harding was one of the first disciples of Jung. And in that book, she very clearly talks about the interplay of opposites and how they produce the psychic energy that get us moving. And of course, neuroses and I defer to Marilyn on this, but neuroses tend to stop us up, I think, and prevent psychic energy from coming through. And so, we want to try to get past those. And of course, we have a tremendous national neurosis in the form of our red state, blue state duality. And we need something to come through to help us find the reconciling third. And since I've made these points, I will now offer the link to our confluence, because we've been talking about our confluence for some time, and it seems to me that that's what our confluence is about, which is finding the reconciling third. And so I'm giving it onto the YouTube channel and then onto the Zoom chat.
While you're doing that, I want to point out that this idea of synthesis, antithesis, and synthesis is just another instance of the dialectic, which was,
right,
I said, very much in play with Plato. And it's very much this idea of the tension of the opposites that Jung points out here at the end as being a creation of libido or psychic energy. That's very much the basis for a lot of the Socratic arguments, the arguments in which Socrates is featured as arguing with people, where he's saying, if you were to boil all of the symposium down to one thing, it would be that everyone says that Eros is a god, and Socrates proves beyond the pale that he cannot be a god. And he also reasserts that we have to long for what we lack. And since philosophers, properly understood in the etymology, it means lovers of wisdom. If we love wisdom, it means we desire wisdom, we don't have it, and therefore we long to draw it closer to us. And if Eros is the god of the philosophers, he must be a spirit and not a god. It's kind of complicated, but what he's doing is saying that he uses this theory of opposites in every argument that he disarms, where he's saying, right, does the smaller man desire to be smaller, or does he desire to be stronger? Does night not give rise to day and day give rise to night? And so on. And that's it's almost like a principle throughout all of his arguments.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up, Nick, because then Socrates basically paved the way for the four types of love to be differentiated: the eros, the storge, the agape, and the philia. And eros being sexual and passionate, and storge, storge, is familial. And then agape, it's not physical, but it's a feeling. And then philia is love without romantic attraction, say friends. And so what's interesting is when Socrates, disarms all the previous, he paves the way for a differentiation of a discussion of love, because he also undeifies it, undeifies eros, where then we can unpack it. And, then the quaternity of love types, eros, storge, agape, and philia come up.
Right.
Yeah, I would have to think about that. I mean, I don't want to veer too far afield here. I know I probably already have in some sense, but I think that's true. And there's also a point in there where he's saying everything that you all have said before me is true, but it's not the final answer, rather than just undoing all of the arguments.
Mm-hmm. Right.
But anyways, let's, I don't want
like always complete, but never finished, lifelong.
Sure.
Right. Okay. So, so that we do face duality as a society and within ourselves. And the idea is to find how we can reconcile the duality, which if we have a neurosis, we're fighting against ourselves, I think. And so
I think so. That's a good point. Neuroses is fighting against ourselves.
right. And so the point I want to make, which is what we're trying to bring forth in our confluence next summer, is that we're going to show people other ways to find our way around duality, to find the reconciling third thing. In other words, in the case of our national neurosis, how to start making our country purple instead of either red or blue.
Skip, that reminds me of Samuel Taylor Coleridge, the esemplastic imagination, and esemplastic being the unifying, or that which makes one, where then the imagination is one of those unifying components.
Well, and we all have these dualities within us all the time, and they are the source of psychic energy, as Esther Harding points out, and Jung points out throughout his career. And so what has become clear, much more clear to me as I've proceeded through this, is that we can be taught to find solutions for ourselves. And yes, sometimes our solutions are very tight ball of complexes where we need the help of a doctor to help us work through things. But very often we just have simple neuroses where the solutions are available if we only look at them. And so that's what we're going to be doing in Montana next summer. And we're going to have a very exclusive gathering, which will be by invitation only. So if any listener here, both on YouTube in the replay or here on Zoom, wants to participate in our event, please go to that link, and it will put you through to a mail to link to send Tim Holmes a message saying that you would like to be a participant. We're only going to allow 30 people in, and the idea is to find something that is replicable, that we can help others in our communities with, both as individuals and as a community in general. So we have we're showing the way with a play that was written by Murray Stein and Henry Abramovich, which you can actually see online now because Chiron has published it, or the Jung Center, the Asheville Jung Center has published it on YouTube. It's called The Analyst and the Rabbi. But we'll be performing it next summer. That's why I have this mustache, because I'm going to perform the part of Carl Jung. And so we have many dualities that are presented in that play, and the play ends with the solution to all of them, and they are, Gentile and Jew, victim and victor, let's say, in the Second World War. There's all kinds of dualities that are brought forward in that play. But it's actually the last two words of the play that pulls it all together, bang. And shows how we live with these dualities, both in our lives and etc. But the purpose is to don't do what I say, do what I do, and we have 6 professionals who are putting together what we do to help ourselves. And so far, I haven't had to go to a psychotherapist. I've been doing a lot of things over my life, but anyway.
Are you going to read this next chapter? Are we going to get into this?
I think we are not. And my reason is simple. I'm required to take a shower every night and use a special cleanse on my hip so that I'll be ready for my hip replacement on Thursday. And so I need to go and do that. and so let me just announce now, Nick is going to lead the discussion next week. I will come and get the thing going unless I advise Nick otherwise, that I cannot do it at all. If we don't show up, that's because I can't get this system on, but I expect that I will be recovered enough by next Monday so that I can start the session off. And so I'm going to start it off, but I'm making no promises about being present. But Jung is talking about the power principle here, and I think it ought to be done as a contiguous discussion, which I think Nick is very.
Yeah, I hope we can get through the whole thing. I mean, it's only 10 pages, so we should be able to get through it. But,
well, if you can, terrific. A great thing to get through it. And so more power to Nick, and I may have to call on him another week. We'll have to see how my recovery goes. People say that after hip replacement, after 3 or 4 weeks, one is typically pretty much recovered. We're going to see, because if I'm out in California a month from tomorrow, or a month from today, actually, you'll know that I'm pretty much recovered. But in any case, I'm going to thank Nick for agreeing to lead us next week. And any other comments anybody wants to make before we wrap up?
I'd just like to say that Nick and I did not color coordinate our shirts, but we did a good job. I just noticed that. So
I think yours is a little more green.
yeah, a little more avocado, a little more limey.
Yeah, I
no,
think
no psychic energy generated there.
Yeah, I also just want to say, if you want to feel some psychic energy being generated, just go have a discussion with somebody whose way of living is absolutely anathema to you, and you'll understand what you mean.
Yeah,
Absolutely. I've certainly observed that at both ends of the spectrum in my lifetime.
well, wasn't Tim talking about his conspiracy theorist friend, and he was doing his level best to empathically listen and understand is without as much judgment as possible, or without judgment as much as possible. That was the same kind of thing, Nick. Someone totally anathema to you, and you get a whole different dose of life going on.
I mean, you do, and only if you're the wisest and calmest among us are you able to contain all the things that are stirring about. I mean, goodness, when I go, meet with my extremely conservative family, it's like all I can do to just sit there and not be like, oh my God.
Well, a friend of mine said a friend of mine in theater said, every time I'm sitting around someone who is anathema to me, I make sure I remove the rotten fruit from my bag because they're going to just start throwing.
Well,
Just like an old school theater.
sometimes you just have to put a fence around it. I mean,
Yeah.
I'll give you an example. In my family, I have one daughter who knocks heads with me over the topic of abortion, and her husband was a senior official in the Bush administration, the W. Bush administration. Actually, he was the staff secretary to Richard Cheney, and so extremely conservative. But I love this family, and only on one occasion did I make the mistake of bringing up this topic that we are at loggerheads over. And after that, I said, one thing we have to do is never to discuss these issues between us, because they don't have to do with us as a family and as as father and daughter. And so that has worked out. And so, that neurotic little piece in our relationship is there, but we put a fence around it and put it off to the side, and we always know it's there, but we can never discuss it because it just causes too much pain.
Agree to disagree,
Yes,
and
but,
that way.
yes, but when you go meet with them, do you not feel that there's almost an overwhelming amount of psychic energy and a want to jump in and say what you even?
I don't.
Okay, well,
okay. I love my daughter. I love her husband, and I love my 4 grandsons that came from my daughter in that marriage.
yeah, I mean, my situation is much the same. Of course, I know that certain things are off the table, and rightfully so. They shouldn't be discussed within the family. But all I'm saying is that even still, that situation stirs up a whole lot of psychic energy, nonetheless.
Yeah, I mean, certainly it can. And what we have to learn is to put a fence around it and leave it over there where we're not going to raise it. And
Well, and that fence is important because sometimes that steeps inside the fence and transforms. I mean, I remember when I published my tarot deck, my dad was like, that's pseudoscience side. No. He respected the series of 78, actually 79 with the cardback paintings from a consistency and artistic standpoint, but that's it. End of story. We'll scroll forward about 6 years. We're having some conversation, and he taught Greek tragedy at a graduate level, and it just came to me, and I went, Dad, I get it. So here's the tarot gig. Oh, no, let's we fenced that thing off, and we're close, but that's gonna. No, this isn't an incendiary. How about this, Dad? You're the head of the ancient Greek Senate, and you're there in your pressed white robe. But your second walks up and says, hey, what happened to little Jordan? Where's he? And you have to say something. And what do you say? And he went, all right, I'm playing. I like the context. And I said, so you say, oh, Jordan moved out to a little 40-mile town called Delphi. They call him the Oracle. Maybe you heard of it. But all of a sudden, this 40-mile town, North Texas, mesquite tree is the Texas bonsai tree, my dad's perspective. Just, he laughed for days. But what happened is I was able to pour the things out of the fence because it took 6 years for me to then to come to the table, actually to his perspective. But then, he moved out to the little 40-mile town called Delphi. They call him the Oracle. Maybe you heard of it, and all of a sudden it just put it in historical context. And it was all okay. But honestly, until that point, like you said, Skip, there was no impetus whatsoever to bring it up.
Well, sometimes these things do resolve. And so, for one thing, all of my daughters were born after Roe v. Wade. Okay, so they had no experience whatsoever with the way society was before Roe v. Wade. And so, you know, if it were possible that the Supreme Court would somehow reverse Roe v. Wade, which I am dubious about, but if it happened, the consequences would be so horrific that very soon a lot of those people, like the position my daughter has, would say, "Oh, you said that was hot, and now I know what hot is." And
the underlying where it's not about yes or no to abortion, it's about the health of a woman getting an illegal abortion in a backwoods coat hanger Hooverville that puts her life in danger because now it's been criminalized.
And this is very, very close to me personally, because both of my grandmothers were Victorian women. Okay, they were very conservative Victorian women. My maternal grandmother used to wear a bustle and you know, full-length skirts. And my paternal grandmother hated sex, according to my father, quote unquote. But they had reason, because between the two of them, they had 5 abortions in the 1920s. Okay. And so I consider those women and what it took for them to have that procedure. And I say, oh my God, you know, what did they go through, and what was the basis of their decision? Of course, there were no good prophylactic methods in those days, and both of them raised 3 children. Okay, both of them raised 3 children, and this was a deep, dark secret that my mother kept until basically until she was on her deathbed. In the last 2 weeks of her life, my mother told me 2 secrets that had never come up before. And one of them was that my 2 grandmothers had had 5 abortions between them. And so that's, you know, the consequences of not having it available are just horrific. And so, you know, we've been telling folks that the stove is hot for a very long time, but if they actually experience it, they'll find out what hot is, and then maybe this issue will go away. I don't know. Marilyn, you're shaking your head. Do you agree?
Well, I agree, because that was a big secret in my family as well. And in my faith, we name people after someone who died. So my grandmother, my father's mother, died of an abortion. And my mother also told me very late in life, but I couldn't be named after her because it was so sinful. So she never had a person named after her. So, and I think the thinking is that her memory will be forgotten, because we name after people who die to carry on their memory. And so I was named after a prior generation. And I think it's horrendous when I'm nodding my head because I totally agree with you. And these women did have abortions. So in my case, this grandmother died, and my father was left as a 4-month-old baby. And in those times, his father was, you know, the grandmother took the child, which was my father, and then they removed his father from the family. So the whole course of our family life was shaped by this. My father being raised by a grandmother, not having any contact with his father. All of our life was shaped by this one incident. And it would have been so much better if she had had a legal abortion. She lived, and my father and the baby that was to be aborted would have lived, and it would have been a very much richer life than he had. So I'm nodding my head because we had the same experience, and it was very hard for my mother to say, well, there's a secret in your family, and I have to tell you so that you'll know. And then I had to tell my children, because I don't believe in family secrets, so they had to know.
Yeah.
And I don't know if other people have that too, where these big family secrets and people don't know about it. And if you knew about it, you could understand things very differently. So
that's
Guys,
powerful.
I'm gonna check out here. I'll see you all next week.
Okay, thanks,
Take care,
Nick.
Nick.
Be well.
thank you so much.
See you next
Bye-bye.
week.
That's powerful, Marilyn, because my grandfather, I remember one day, I mean, my head was hanging low, and I think I'd done, I don't know, remember what, wrong. I was 12, 13, and I really messed something up, and it was no good. I mean, it wasn't criminal, but it was probably pretty close. I mean, it called 12, 13-year little boy cut up and big problem. And he just sat me down and he said, look, we're behind you no matter what, 100%. Hear that, no matter what. Stay in there and keep on pitching. If you make that a secret, it's going to make you unhealthy. And if you're unhealthy, we'll become unhealthy. Just go ahead and say it. It's okay. But I remember the power of just this, literally the mantle of just whole atlas just lifted, because there was this, oh, I don't have to hide this. I don't have to. It's like someone scolding someone too hard for doing something wrong. The kid does not have changed behavior. They learn to hide it better next time.
Exactly.
And he, early on, very much just stay in there and keep on pitching, no matter what. And I remember coming up one day saying, so how far does no matter what go? You know, and then, you know, we had a conversation, and I realized that didn't have a limit. It was what he said, that no matter what.
Yeah, it has to be unconditional love.
Yeah, and I think he said then, look, the African hunters would tell you right now to go fast, go alone. But if you want to go far, go together. And this family's together. So open. And so that's really struck a chord to resonate when you said, I don't believe in family secrets, because I was taught early on he didn't either. And I think because he had a lot, and he wanted to break that chain. He didn't want me to continue to then harm by omission, avoidance, omission. So I appreciate you both sharing those, because I think that was one of the most powerful social lessons of my inner society. Of don't feel shameful. Just it is what it is, and don't hold it all on your own.
Right. Okay, so we're going to wrap up here. We've kicked off sort of a political debate on the
chat,
which I don't want to.
I just want to wish you good luck in your surgery.
Oh, thank you so
definitely.
much. I appreciate that very much, and all will be well. I've had a lot I've had a lot of opportunities to find out what surgery is like, and so basically for me, it's I tell the anesthesiologist I'm very confident, and the next thing I know, they're waking me up.
Well, yeah, that's the funniest time. When, you know, they have this little syringe of this yellow green stuff, and I'm going, what's that kind of, you know, count backwards from 10. I go, nah.
Yeah,
like,
right.
I don't even get through the number 9.
Right.
And then there's what happened? Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so we're going to cut this short at this point, and thank you all for being here today.
Yeah, definitely.
And we'll see any of you at the advanced reading group on Wednesday. That will be the last
Look forward
session.